So this bike has a stock Apex drivetrain by SRAM. It's a 40 tooth up front and an 11 to 42 on the back. And I am going to swap it out for a 32 tooth up front and a 11 to 46 in the back. Now to do that, I've got to swap out the whole crank because this bike has what's called a BCD, and that's the spacing between the bolts there of, I believe, 110, and I'm going to go to a 94. And the problem is, as you can see, you can only go so small because of the bolts that are there. It will stop you from putting on a small chain ring. So let's talk about gear inch for a minute here. This bike stock, as it comes from the factory with this 40 tooth up front and the 11 to 42 on the back, has a low gear inch of 26. That means for every revolution of the crank, you'll travel 26 inches when you're in the easiest gear, the big cog ring back there. Now, when I put the 32 on there with the 42 in the back, it'll become a 24 gear inch. Now, when you're bike touring, supposedly the magic number is you want to be below 20 gear inches with a load and having to deal with hills. It just makes it easier. That's more or less what a granny gear would be. If you had a triple on your bike, that usually has a 22 in the front, and that's a really small chain ring, and that makes it pretty easy. So for point of reference, this is a road bike, and this has a traditional compact crank, which is a 50-34 in front and a 11 to 28 in the back. It'll have a 32.3 gear inch when it's in the smallest chain ring up front and the biggest cog in the back. What we're going to do now is measure what they call the offset, I believe, and that indicates how far away the chain ring sits from the bottom bracket. Because if it's not in the right position, it won't shift correctly. Now if you look at this set up here, I've got it right in the middle, and it pretty much lines up straight with the chain ring. I have a very high-tech ruler, they call it, to measure the offset, or the distance the chain ring is from the frame, the 11 to 46 Sunrace cassette, a chain of a different length, a NX crank that is a 73mm bottom bracket. This is a new bottom bracket, but I just bought that to get the spacers because the spacers were $12 and a whole new bottom bracket was $35, I think. So I thought I'll just get that and have a bottom bracket to spare. These spacers will help us position the new crank and also make the 73 work with a 68mm bottom bracket. And this is an aftermarket 40 tooth chain ring for Fourrières. The reason I got this one is because SRAM maxes out at 38 teeth on the NX crankset, and I want to get it back to its stock configuration. Ideally, I want to get a separate wheel set and have this 11 to 46 stay on a pair of 650B wheels, so that I'm not messing with pulling the cassette on and off when I want to go on a bike tour. So with my high-tech system, I'm going to measure this offset, and I look at it straight down. It looks like it's about almost exactly a quarter of an inch. Low-tech system, but this will give me a reference for when I replace the crank. Using a locking pin. Next time, pull the pedals first with the chain on. Ooh, the washer's on there. I should probably have done this while I was still on the ground too. Pull it out. There we go. Pull it against the cap here, the 10mm cap. I don't know which way this goes, I don't remember. You gotta watch these threads, they're really thin. I've taken this on and off a few times now and really gotta be careful you don't cross thread it. Yeah, these are really snug. And what we'll do is we'll fit this guy on. Yeah, so the measurement is actually where they consider the measurement is these two farthest points, 180 degrees opposite. But this is a 94, and I believe the other one would be a 110. Here goes the new crank arm and chain ring, 40 tooth. Does have the narrow wide right there. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to put both spacers on the other side. Okay, here we go. Here's the bottom bracket. I'm going to put the spacers on there, 2.5mm each. There. Okay, so there it is there. There's the two spacers on the non-drive side. And let's go ahead around and measure. And it is not near as close. I was probably one line over, one small line over. The other option is to swap out the whole crank. But like I was saying, I wanted a system where I didn't have to deal with the bottom bracket. And these are really fine threads. It's just the whole hassle of taking that off. This is just personal preference in the way I wanted to do it. And now when I go to the largest, you hear it very quickly. So that leads me to believe that it's cross-chaining quite a bit. Just a little bit of an update here since I started this video. I ended up going on a little bike tour for 4 days up the northern coast of California, and I installed the 32 tooth chainring on the NX crank, which was the goal of doing this. And then I installed my 11 to 46 crank in the back, giving me a gear inch of below 20. I want to say it's close to the 19. And this drivetrain worked perfectly. No problems at all. No skipping, no nothing, no wanting for the chain to come off. And since I know there's a problem with this 42 chain ring, that it's cross-chaining and making a lot of noise and not in the correct position, I went ahead and bought these spacers. This is a 2mm spacer set and a 1mm spacer set. And what I'm going to go ahead and do is try and install that and see if that helps with the cross-chaining. If you look closely, you probably can't tell that the actual wide narrow is actually a different pattern. This one has a little bit more of a hook to it, and it's also, I don't know if it's thicker, but it's definitely got a different profile than the original SRAM. That might be contributing to the noise. One thing I want to mention is just be careful. I've been taking these chainring bolts on and off quite a bit. This is a 6mm on this side, and then on the other side you put in a 5mm to hold it while you tighten it. Just be careful, because I've gotten kind of lazy and not stuck the Allen in far enough, especially on the 6mm side, and I've burred these up, so these have to be replaced. I went ahead and did some tests with the various spacers, and I found out with this one that's more or less a 2.5mm spacer. Puts the chainring in the correct position. As you can see, I don't know if you can tell, but there's an air gap here. There's a spacer in there. And what I did is I went with a slightly longer chain bolt to accommodate the spacer, and I've more or less got that in a matching position to the original Apex 40 tooth that was on there. This is the chain bolts that came with the Foyer's 40 tooth, and they happen to have had a 2.5mm spacer on there, and that's what I ended up using. Like I said, I tried the 2mm and the 1mm, and they weren't really quite enough. I want to say this distance right here is about 7mm. This is the original SRAM, just for information, that I replaced with this wolf tooth, and that again is a 4mm, and that's 4mm from there to the base of the collar. And this is, I bought this just in case, but this is way too big. This is for a triple, supposedly. This is a 38 tooth chain ring SRAM 94 BSD, so it bolts right on the NX. And I picked this up in the meantime because it was a good price on eBay. I think it was like $30 or whatever. And I put it on, I rode a little bit, but then I did one really big hill climb with it, like a 30-mile day with like 4,000 feet of climbing, and I was mostly in the lower gear, and as you can see, it didn't wear evenly. That leads me to believe that this isn't in the right position either, so it wasn't very noisy. Like I said, I just wanted to wrap this video up, but I may go ahead and experiment a little bit more and shift the chainring over a little bit more to see if I can quiet it, but it is still making noise. It isn't as loud as it was. It's certainly an improvement. It is clickety. In terms of cost, this NX crank set with the 32 tooth that came on it was, I think, $95 on Amazon. And then, a chain is probably 20 bucks. The 40 tooth, this is an aftermarket. I want to say that was $30 on eBay. Again, this is what I'm going to do. To each his own. But hopefully you found it informative. All right, thanks.